Hey, good morning and welcome to our Heart4Iran webinar. My name is David. Again, welcome and good to see you here today and be with us. We've got some really exciting things to talk about today. Unfortunately, Mike is not going to be with us today, but we do have a really special guest for a really special topic. Today, I'm excited. We're going to be talking about Islam and the Trinity. That's one of the most important discussions and topics when it comes to working with former Muslims and Muslims to help them understand Christianity and come to Christ. The Trinity seems to be one of the most difficult topics to deal with for them. So today we've got a real honor and a treat. You guys know Heart4Iran, we're a group of more than 100 ministry partners working around the world to reach the nation of Iran. But today we're going to highlight one of our own team members, a guy that I've been personally friends with now for many years as we work together to reach the nation of Iran. So I want to welcome today Edwin Abnous. He's our managing producer and in charge of all of our productions through the TV channel Mohabbat TV. So welcome, Edwin. It's good to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, David. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to you viewers. It's a blessing and exciting time to be with you guys.
Well, very good. So yeah, Edwin, you and I have been doing ministry stuff together for quite a while now, and I'm glad we got a chance to get you on the webinar and unpack some of the things you've been doing in TV and in now your new book that you've written, which is what we want to highlight. So again, yeah, thanks for coming on and being with us.
Good to be with you guys. Yes, our friendship, I think, goes back to almost 12 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago when we started together. You know, you were working in a different part of the ministry. We joined together in this Farsi field, and it's a great honor to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Welcome. Well, Edwin, we want to introduce you to our audience. We want them to get to know you. Of course, I'm excited to dive into the topic of your new book, Islam and the Trinity. But before we do all of that, we do have a video to share a little bit about this new book that's coming out right now. If we can run that.
The Trinity in Islam, a theological exploration, aims to contribute to the empowerment of the Persian-speaking Church. This book deals with the Trinity in two parts. First, the reader will explore its theological dimensions from various angles. The second part is apologetic in nature. That is to say, a formal defense of the Trinity will be made using an intertextual dialogue with the different authors, verses of the Quran and Muslim thinkers, and a dialogue based on critical, defensive, and analytical methods. Many saints who have left Islam struggle for a long time with the doctrine of Trinity. In the context of the Persian-speaking Church, teaching this doctrine is a hard task. As these saints consider the Trinity, my hope is for this book to lift the veil of confusion and bring about understanding, resulting in more vivid Christian experience. My hope is for this book to ignite a spark of enthusiasm in its readers, that they may grow ever more devoted to contemplation and teaching, especially in the teaching the doctrine of Trinity. This book is meant to encourage an intellectual pursuit of Persian-speaking Church, provoking further thought and a deeper longing for truth. It can be said that in the last century, no Christian teaching has received as much attention as the Trinity. My prayer is for the book to add depth to its reader, impacting their faith, provoking further thought. The gospel of salvation depends on it.
All right. Well, that's great. I'm excited to dive into this topic. Edwin, people don't know you yet, and I want to introduce you. Can you tell me a little bit of your backstory of coming from Iran?
Yes.
People might remember on our webinar that last month we had Gilbert. You guys were actually knew each other back in Iran days. And tell us a little bit of your story and how you came to Christ and how you got involved with this ministry.
Sure. Yeah, I was born in 1974 in Iran. This is way before the revolution happens, Iranian revolution. And I don't remember much about that great time that we have back then, the king, but I've heard a lot of good stories about how country was developing. It was a progressive country, but things changed overnight, David. And all of a sudden, when the new government formed and the king had to leave the country, the entire atmosphere, landscape of the country changed. After that, the economic, political, social aspect got great hit. And I grew up in that context, in Islamic context, and I am coming from Armenian Orthodox background, so I'm ethnically Armenian. I grew up in an Orthodox church, but great grandfather was a priest in an Orthodox church. That's where I get my last name from, I grew up in that context for until up to 1994, I think it was, when, as you mentioned, Gilbert, who was on the webinar before, we were classmates. So he was sitting right, behind me, and he mentioned that I'm fruit of his ministry. It is true, but he was also a great hindrance to my faith. I looked at as a joke, of course. He was a great example. He was a great brother. So he introduced me to the church, and his father was the pastor in Assembly of God, the Farsi-speaking camp. And so I went to the church. For the first time, I heard the gospel very clearly, and that was the moment I realized what I believed as as a Christian was not complete. So in an Orthodox church, everything is different. The way they preach the gospel, it has a different context. But in the Assembly of God, I heard the gospel very clearly, and that is when I received Christ. But after that, everything changed. Gilbert's father, Pastor Hyde, got murdered right after him. There were other two pastors who got murdered. So all of a sudden, this beautiful Christianity that I was experiencing at the beginning of my faith, that everything is just nice. I just discovered this new Christian, community, practicing my faith. I was really enjoying, and all of a sudden, imagine you lose 3 or 4 great pastors, influential pastors in your community. So I saw myself in the book of Acts. So everything that we read in the book of Acts, it just came real, so we were experiencing our faith, or practicing our faith in a very different manner. So that was the journey, very quick journey of how I came to faith. And then I stayed in the country for a couple more years. I was involved in a ministry there, not related to the church. I was trying to keep that away from the church, because the church was really under very close surveillance by the government. Eventually, I left the country in 2000, and I moved to the United States. And since then, I'm plugged into the ministry in different formats, different context. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so happy that all of this happened, because now we get to know each other and be friends and all of that. But just a couple of things I want to point out in your story. So for our viewers, Edwin is talking about coming from an Armenian Orthodox background. So there are, we know Iran as a Muslim country, but there are minority Christians there that are not considered Persian or what. So were you considered kind of a minority there, or how did that play out in your daily life growing up?
Yeah. The reality, that label being minority, is very colorful for Armenians and Assyrians, and the reason, because you spoke different language, and also you believed different faith, which was not Islam. So we were Christians. But the interesting thing was our activity or our churches were not shut down. So you were free to practice your faith as long as it was within the context of Armenian community. So you could speak and preach and worship your God in the Armenian churches in Armenian language. But again, I mean, this freedom was all restricted. It was not that you could everything that you want to do. And Armenians also, they had their own schools, their own little community. The restrictions, we experienced those restrictions after revolution. We used to read Armenian history. We used to read Armenian language, and also Bible. Those were taken away from Armenian community, and they slowly introduced Islamic teachings into the these minority groups as well.
So when you went to church, I don't understand why I don't know this, but Pastor Hike, was he preaching in Armenian or was he preaching in Farsi back in those days?
That specific camp that we were part of, they spoke Farsi, so they preached in Farsi. So we were preaching the gospel to Muslims. So that is why one of the reason they focus on our campus was because we were really active in Muslim community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now you're in the United States, you're working in ministry, and you've had a massive impact through TV, the channel Mohabbat TV. So for the viewers, Mohabbat TV is the satellite TV channel for Heart4Iran, and we're broadcasting in Farsi into Iran 24/7. We've got our 24/7 call center. And so you've actually been on quite a few of those programs and done teaching and even live call-in programs for Iran over the last few years.
Yes, I had the experience of going live for many, many years. And I did have live shows and pre-recorded shows. And I'll continue the ministry in different format now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is great, Edwin, and I'm so glad that our audience has a chance to get to know you and a little bit of your story, but let's jump right into this book. So you just came out with the book, Islam and the Trinity. We heard a little bit about it in the video. But tell us about the book. Why did you think this was an important book to write?
Sure. Yeah, I started thinking and actually writing this book about 5 years ago. So this is the result of writing. I mean, I finished most of the book 5 years ago, but for many reasons, I just didn't wrap it up and then published it. But the reason, very early on, I started thinking and writing about it because I think it is a very important topic to be discussed within the Iranian Muslim community, and not only Iranian Muslim community, but I think Iranian Christians are struggle with this very fact that our God is a triune God. Muslims know these, and I believe the viewers also who are interested with in what Heart4Iran does are familiar with Islamic teachings. The first sayings of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, when he's inviting people to worship Allah, the Islamic God, is this testimony to and call to the oneness of God. In the very beginning, he's against shirk. Shirk is basically idolatry and polytheism. So he is, criticizing that. He's saying that Allah is one God. He neither begets nor is born, and there's no anyone equivalent to him. So that is his fundamental teaching. This is the fundamental teaching of Islam, that God is one. This absolute oneness of God, this doctrine is a fundamental teaching for Muslims. And the reason I wrote this book is twofold, basically. One, to engage in a dialogue with Muslims to challenge the idea of the oneness of God, the absolute unity and oneness of God, but also at the same time to help Iranian Christians who come to faith from the Muslim background to understand the challenges they will face. And that was the main idea, the main concept and motivation for writing this book.
Okay, so in your experience, you've been on TV taking live questions from callers in Iran at all various levels of their faith. How important is this question? How big of a hang-up is it for the Iranian that's looking to come to Christ, or the new believer, or anyone in their various stages? Where does this question rate for them?
It is very important, a very fundamental issue. And the reason I think it is important and it is challenging is because Islam promotes a model of God that is very simple. The concept, the model and concept of God presented in Quran is simple and it really lacks complexity. It's just one God. And when you are familiar with the Christian faith, the very first thing that you hear about it is Christ is Son of God. Christ is God. And right at the beginning of their introduction to Christian faith, they are challenged by that reality that God's oneness is not absolute in the sense that Quran teaches. And the idea of triune God, the idea of God having three persons, is just a foreign idea for a lot of Christians. They believe, they love Christ, and they understand the salvation in the saints. But I think the salvation, the understanding the salvation is not complete until you understand who brings forth the salvation. And a Methodist theologian, Fred Sanders, says that gospel is Trinity and Trinity is gospel. These are related. Salvation and triune God is very closely related together. So the idea of, I go back to when Jews, Jews, they really believed in oneness of God. And that is one of the teachings they never forget. Because of that, they went to exile, because they started, worshiping idols, worshiping different gods, and then God took them to exile. When they came back, that became the main doctrine that really was baked into their mind, that God is one. God is, that does not have any they didn't believe in a shirk. They didn't believe any equivalent to God. And now these Jews are facing Jesus, encountering this Christ who claims to be God. What happens is now they need to expand their understanding of oneness of God. This belief that God is one, the monotheism, needs to take a different form. They need to understand different dimension of this oneness of God. We still believe God is one, but there is a different aspect where there are different layers to it. It's very much like an Iranian Christian that encounters Christ. They will really believe in oneness of God. Now this oneness of God, this idea, this concept needs to be expanded. They need to understand different aspects of it. That is the struggle.
Yeah, I think of even Mike, our co-host, who's typically with us, his testimony, and when he was encountering Christ, his story is that he prayed. He's like, Jesus, I want what my mom had. I want to believe in you, but I can't understand this idea of Son of God and what you might be. He's coming from a Muslim background, and I just have never forgot that. His story, the Trinity, kind of could be a hang up for a Muslim that wants to come into Christ, because they're like, I see this, I want to experience it, I want to be a part of it, but this thing, Son of God, how can that be? And so, we hear it over and over and over again through the ministry. Isn't that right?
And we also, Christians, have our share of adding to this confusion to the Muslims, because once you hear the doctrine of Trinity is not a simple doctrine. It's a complex doctrine, and if you want to be precise and orthodox, you got to know the words have meaning. You have to be precise in when you utter this doctrine. And Iranians are known for not to be precise in their conversations. Sometimes the misunderstanding happens there, and then when we say things that we don't really mean, that adds to the confusion. And I believe we haven't had solid teachings really in Iranian Christian community about the doctrine. And when they have that misconception about the oneness of God, or their basic understanding of oneness of God, and then they hear all sorts of teachings that in reality may fall into the category of heresy, and then you imagine how challenging for a new believer that becomes, that what is real. I mean, what they say is not real. It does not make sense to me. And then Islam is just pulling me back to the oneness of God. That is my fundamental, presupposition about God. It becomes confusing very quick.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So one of the things I'm really excited about, and you and I have talked about this in the past, is the idea that as the church grows and it's emerging inside of Iran, that leaders are coming forth and they're starting to write specifically for that Iranian audience. And so here you are, coming from that context, and now you're creating a book. I was going to ask you, for the audience's sake, Can you help explain why is it important to have a book like this from the Iranian background going to the Iranian? What's the difference in a book maybe that was written to Arabs or that was written in English originally or anything like that?
That's a good question. The reality is, again, there is no shortage of books on Trinity in the Western world. Obviously, most of Iranians cannot read English, but the works that are available in Farsi right now, or in Arabic, if it is translated into Farsi, most of them either are written having Western theology in mind, that they really do not engage with the Islamic context, or if they do engage with Islamic context, they use resources and sources that are Sunnis. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with that or not. Muslims, they have two different, they are divided into two different sects of Shiites and Sunnis, very much like Protestant and Catholics these days, if you want to compare these two religions together as far as this division goes. Protestants really do not receive Catholic sources as authority, authority sources, and vice versa. And Muslims as well. If you're an Iranian Shiite Muslim, you do not go to the Sunni sources for anything, because you do not really see any authority in that. And a lot of books, even written in Islamic context, use Sunni texts, and that is not really cut it for Iranian Christian. And one of the reasons I started thinking and writing this book was I needed to go back to the original Shiite sources, not only in where they are interpreting Quranic verses, but also wherever they're engaging with Bible.
So Edwin, would you say, as you're talking about this, a book could be coming from a Western background, or it could be coming from a background that's quoting of Sunni sources? Is this going to be one of the only books or one of the first books with the Shiite background, or did you have a lot of resources you could kind of pull from when it came to looking at the Shiite background?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately now, everything being online, a lot of journals and research papers that are available online, a lot of Muslim scholars, Iranian Muslim scholars, are engaging and getting into dialogue with the Christian faith, and those are available online from academic places that they provide these online resources. So it was easy to get my hands on, and everything that I did not have, I ordered. One of the books I really enjoyed reading, written by an Islamic scholar. Let me just say something about this real quick, because it blew my mind. The reason is, this guy is a Muslim scholar, and how I came to know this guy, I saw a documentary which this guy was criticizing Trinity. A portion of this documentary was presenting Muhabbat's shows, one of the TV shows about Trinity. So I got to know the guy from that TV show that he made. I got his book, and it was interesting the way he described or talked about Trinity. It was beautiful. And as a matter of fact, one of the conferences I had in Austria, I played a video clip of this guy talking about Trinity, and I stopped the video and I said to the audience, cheer him. This guy is doing a far greater job than most of Iranian Christians do when talking about Trinity. So it was important for me to go back to these sources and to understand what they say. And I totally forgot your question, David, right there.
No, you answered it. I mean, that's the point. Here's a modern Iranian scholar from the Muslim background. He is engaging with the Trinity and in modern right now today for his audience. And if we just try to, translate something into Farsi or slap, anything Western and just say, here you go, it's not really relevant, and it doesn't speak to the audience. And so I just congratulate you for really diving in and bringing something relevant and modern for your Iranian ministry and what you're trying to get done.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's an important, every time you want to talk to talk to a certain group, you got to understand their perspective. They have a different view of, even when it comes to the using philosophy, the way they use their sources of philosophy is very different. The way they ask their questions is different, and we need to be able to recognize what kind of questions we are answering. Sometimes we teach from Western perspective to Iranian audience and answering questions that are really our own questions, right? I mean, they're really
Right,
not
right.
questions.
Yeah, we could be answering a question that no one's really asking. So this is great. That's a great setup. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Let's dive into the book. So, you're speaking directly to the Iranian audience, Muslims, people, Christians that need to know more about the Trinity and understand it. What are the main arguments you make for the Trinity? Can we dive into that a little bit? What are the topics that you cover, and how do you unpack that in the book?
Yeah, this book attempts to demonstrate that Quran's statement about the Trinity do not address what Christians believed and confessed historically. And this is true now, and it was true in the very early centuries of Christianity, both in the Roman empires and also within Christian communities in the Arabian Peninsula. Neither one affirmed Quran's claim nor its understanding about the Trinity. And this would mean that Quran's critics of this doctrine, the doctrine of Trinity, is not directed to the Orthodox doctrine of Trinity. And that is what my question was. If it is not addressing what Christians believe now and believed back then, not only in the Roman Empire, in the first early Christianity, but also in Arabian Peninsula, what is Quran talking about? What is this big font about? Whatever they call it, Trinity, and so that was my question. I attempted to answer in this book, and also once I dived into the Iranian Muslim sources when they try to make sense of these Quranic verses, I found out that they also are confused. And there were many different interpretations of these Quranic verses. Some said, no, this is talking about the Trinity. And they, like Muhammad Kashani, the author of this book, the way he presents these Quranic verses does not make sense to me. And the reason is because he redefines Quranic verses to bring to the modern understanding of what we, define as a Trinity.
Okay.
And so my question was, if the Quran is not answering, is not criticizing the doctrine of Trinity, what is it? Is Quran talking about the specific heretical group that were present there, or is Quran really misunderstood what Trinity really was about? And in this journey, I rule out the first answer, that Quran is not talking about or not addressing to these heretical groups for many reasons. And my conclusion at the end was, I think Quran misunderstood what Christians believed about the Trinity.
Okay, wow. So let me try to restate that. You addressed it from the position that, when you look at what the Quran has to say about the Trinity, that it doesn't really reflect what we understand as the Trinity. And it's not because of some reason that they were looking at a group and that group had a misunderstanding. Perhaps it was another reason. So do you specifically get into that? Like, what are the reasons, or how do you defend the idea that it was, maybe not a heretical sect that they were looking at and all of that? Did you unpack the history of it, or how did you research all of that?
Yes, I basically try to not only go back to the writings of Iranians that they have pondered about these questions, and also went back to the church history and the Christianity, any information we have the Christianity in that context, in that area, and most of them agree, even though this is not a public news. I mean, what they say is behind the closed doors, but in public, what they claim is different thing. Yeah, there are many reasons behind that. We come to that conclusion, and the thing is, when Muhammad comes to the in play, and when he talks about his faith, Christian faith was a they did not have any misunderstanding about their belief in Trinity. So
Okay.
the Council of Nicaea and Chalcedon, whatever we had back then, we went through all that. All these theological battles have been fought in the past. Now Christians everywhere, at least they are united in they're agreeing on this doctrine. And that is the case also for the Arabs where they lived, where Muhammad lived. So that was a common Trinity, the true Orthodox doctrine of Trinity was accepted within that region. So his misunderstanding kind of was reflected in his sayings in Quran.
Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to have to take your word for that, this argument, because I just want to point out to the viewers, this book is only available in Farsi. And we did have a question about, is this book available in English? Would this book be helpful for non-Farsi speakers that are working with Persians? And that's the reality. Right now, it's only in Farsi. So we're getting people, Edwin, maybe an English translation should be in the works next. But for now, for our audience, this book is only available in Farsi. And to the question, Edwin, maybe you would speak to that. How useful would this book be as a gift for an Iranian friend or someone like that, as even a starting point to the gospel?
Yes, the book has two parts. The first 5 chapters of book are basically dealing with the doctrine of Trinity in very pure theological perspective. So I do not bring Quran and Islamic, belief into that discussion on the first portion of the book. So that gives the audience a better understanding, the reader better understanding of what Trinity is and how it relates to the gospel. How are these two doctrines connected together? And I dive into the idea of progressive revelation and why that is an important doctrine in Christian faith. I talk about even though we're trying to explore the idea of the doctrine of Trinity, this truth, this revelation, but we need to make sure that we affirm the mystery also in this journey. We're talking about a God who is beyond our understanding. So the first portion of book deals with the fundamentals. It takes them through a theological journey. The second portion of the book is more apologetic in nature, and that is very useful for those who are in the ministry with Iranians. It is very useful for those who come to Christian faith with some presupposition about the oneness of God, and they do not want to let it go. And one of the reasons, David, you see the heresy of oneness, the anti-Trinitarian sects that are creeping into Christian faith, Iranian Christian community, is because Trinity is such a difficult concept. They don't have good resources, and they have been really influenced by Islam. So that portion of book, it gives them an understanding to have a good answer to what Islam is insisting them to believe.
Good. We are getting more requests right now, Edwin, for your book to be done in English. So just so you know, the comments are coming in for that. But we do have a question from one of our viewers, and they wanted to know, do you think many Christian ministries reaching out to Muslims aren't doing enough introducing the Trinity from the beginning? Often we see the gospel preached to Muslims only focus on Jesus Christ and leaving behind the Father and the Holy Spirit. Do you see that to be true? And do you think this is something your book addresses?
I think it is true. And I think our approach is, again, very Western when it comes to talk about not only gospel, but also the idea of God. And I cannot divorce the idea of the gospel and triune God. You cannot present a full gospel except you get into the reality that our God is 3 in persons. So the gospel is explained in the triune God. So I don't think we do a good job because we assume they wouldn't have any challenge when they come to Trinity. They will receive it. It's just a step of faith they need to take. But yes, they'll take that step of faith, but that battle in their mind will continue for many years, and we need to be able to answer that.
Amen. Amen. Very good. So I just want to go ahead and tell our audience The book is only available in Farsi right now. We hope that we will be able to get an English translation at some point. And I wanted to tell you, we did want to make a special offer today. I'd like to give you one of these books if you have a Farsi friend or someone you're talking to, someone that understands Farsi, and you would like to use this book as a resource. We always do say the first resource you should give someone is the Bible. Of course, we want to start with the Bible, but if you have a friend and maybe you've already given them a Bible and you think this book would be useful for you, we want to give you one of those books today. So there's a link available. If you guys would make a donation of any amount, we're not saying there's any minimum, but if you make a donation of any amount today, the first 10 people that do that, we're going to send you a copy of the book. So that's just make a donation so we can have your contact information and your mailing address and all of that. And we will mail you a copy of the book. Our team is standing by ready to do that today. So I want to have that, first of all, use the link on the screen to make that donation and we'll get it for you. If you don't want to go that route, that's totally fine. We want to recommend also just go to Amazon and buy the book directly. If maybe you want to buy more books than one, and you have a need for these books and resources, you want to give them out to Iranian community, or there's an Iranian church near you that you think would use it. There's the link right in front of you, Islam and the Trinity. The author Edwin Abnous is going to be there, so you can just buy as many books as you want. And then, of course, if you need help with other resources, you can always email us at info@heart4Iran.com. Anytime. We just want to have that open for you guys to email, ask more questions, get in touch with Edwin and any other members of our team to help you deal with whatever situation you're going through. So saying that, make a donation today. We would love to send you a copy of this book and get it out there. Tell your Iranian friends about it. Tell them how they can get a copy on Amazon or purchase a copy for them. I would really highly recommend that. So Edwin, jumping into the rest of the book, you mentioned that the first part of the book is theological in context, and then the second part is more apologetic. And I think you told me that there were multiple authors that contributed to that second section. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? Tell us, what are these sections about, and who are the authors that helped you come up with these apologetic pieces?
Sure. So it's interesting. Both of the articles, there are 3 articles, 3 chapters for the second portion of the book, both of which are the thesis of our masters, one for me and one for Dr. Sasan Tawassuli. So we included that in there. The third one is from an Anglican pastor who lives in Manchester. He deals more with these Quranic verses from technical standpoint. And Dr. Tawassuli, that I believe you guys had him in the webinar in the past,
yes,
is basically engaging the dialogue that has happened historically between Muslims and Christians about the doctrine of Trinity, and basically invites Christians to see the misunderstanding in this communication and refine the way we talk about this doctrine and make sure that we are precise in our words and understand their context while communicating with them.
So I think it sounds like to me a lot of the book deals with misunderstandings around the Trinity, misunderstandings from Islamic perspective, and even misunderstandings from a Christian perspective. Do you think you're able to address those pretty fully with this book?
It reminds me of this story of Augustine when he was walking by the sea, and he saw a little guy digging a hole, and then Augustine asked him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm pouring the sea into this little hole." And then he says, "You foolish boy, you cannot pour the whole water into this, the whole sea into this hole." And then he looks back to Augustine and says, "You're doing the foolish thing to write a book on the Trinity." And it's basically that is my attempt. It's a foolish thing to be able to. That was my attempt at the beginning, but I found out that is not going to happen. More books need to be written about this. The conversation needs to go on, and the book finishes open-ended, and it invites not only Muslims to to continue their dialogue with Christians, but also Christians to be more patient and try to understand this Muslim context in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Dr. Sasson Tavasoli, and he contributed one of the articles. I actually was able to hear him present that article once in person, and it is really beautifully done, and it was really helpful to me to understand, some of the ways I might be miscommunicating the Trinity. And so I'm so thankful that you have that in there, plus what you've written and the others. So my question is, are there other books like this out there? I mean, how many resources are there specifically dedicated to the Iranian audience, that coming from that Iranian background, addressing it in a way that really answers questions for them? Does this book exist anywhere else?
Yeah, there are two books written by Iranian authors tackling the doctrine of Trinity. One of which is written by Dr. Fateh, and he's heading the Pars Theological Center, and he has done a fantastic job. His approach has been a little more classical in a style, Western, from the Western theological perspective. It's a fantastic book, and it's an important fundamental book for Iranians to read. And the second one is more philosophical in nature, written by the same author that we have in the book, Reverend Yassini. And those are great books, but I still yet to see and hope to see more books engaging with the Islamic thoughts and questions and struggles.
Yeah, amen. That's a great point. And I just, agree with you for our audience. If you think about it, how many times have I personally gone into a library or a Christian bookstore, and I can find dozens of books on any kind of topic and to dive in from discipleship on. And, I just hope that our audience appreciated and heard that. You're mentioning 3 books that exist on one of the most important topics for Muslims coming to Christ today inside of Iran, the Trinity. And you can mention 3 books that you think of that really deal with this topic well. And I'm so proud of you. Again, I just want to say, Edwin, thank you for stepping up and taking the opportunity to put your thoughts down and really write from your perspective to this audience and create this really, really valuable resource. I just thank you for doing that. And I think it's going to be a really great book.
It was a great honor to be able to provide this content. It was an interesting journey for me, and it made me, again, going back to the diving into the context. I moved to the United States 20 years ago. And when I look back this journey that I had from my own culture to moving away from that, being a lot more Americanized and adopting the American culture and a thought process, I see myself every year getting away from that original context. And that can be a dangerous thing for ministers, those who wanted to minister Iranians, because the further away you get from their mindset, their questions, the communication, the conversation is not really solid, and you're not hitting a target. And it was a great reminder for me that I need to get back and update myself, immerse myself into their own word and try to see the word. We do that with the Bible. When we want to read the Bible, we go back to the first century or whenever the Bible is written, any book that we want to read, to see the word from their perspective. That is exactly what we need to do when we're talking to Iranian Christians or Iranian Muslims. We need to see the word from their perspective.
Very good. So I've got 2 questions. I want to kind of combine them into one. So one guy is saying, is it possible for a Muslim to even understand the Trinity until they come to faith in Christ? Kind of like it's this second thing that has to come and be taught to them. And then the other question is just saying, well, how should we explain the Trinity? So, I mean, that's putting you on the spot, but yeah. I mean, after researching this and thinking it, what is the most clear way to understand it? And at what phase should we introduce the Trinity to the seeker?
I think my approach is we will not understand the Trinity. We will be able to define it precisely the way the Bible we collect the data from the Bible, and we put them together and come up with a precise definition of the Bible and many doctrines. But in reality, we won't be able to understand it fully. We're talking about God. We don't have any earthly model to go back and say the Trinity resemble this. We don't have anything like that. So the reality is we won't be able to understand. We won't be able to help them understand, but we definitely can help them see how it is defined, and how to process the biblical data. And the main approach is you will need to engage with Islamic sources. That is the main framework that the Iranian approaches even Christian faith. A lot of misunderstanding or a lot of misconception, presupposition that you need to deal with. If those are not dealt with, we are basically presenting a product of a Western thought to someone who cannot even know how to use.
Wow, that's really good. I love what you just said there, and I think if we have one takeaway from this webinar, that's probably it. We've talked a lot about it, from the Iranian background, answering specifically Iranian questions, dealing with this, and that's beautiful. And then thinking about just really the awesomeness of God, and how it is difficult to describe things, and sometimes we're not able to. So thank you so much for sharing on that. I want to, again, go back to the audience and say, if you want a copy of this book in Farsi for a Farsi friend, go online, make a donation of any size, or just go to Amazon and order it directly yourself. That's no problem. We want to encourage you to do that. Or if you have any more questions, of course, reach out to us, info@heart4Iran.com. And we're happy to engage with you on any topic. Our goal and our passion is to help people get engaged with the ministry and the movement that's happening in Iran. And that's what we want to help you do. So if this resource is valuable to you, then we definitely want to help get that in your hands. So Edwin, I want to jump on to some of the other resources you've created. So you've written other books, and you've also made a lot of TV programs and a lot of different things like that. I want to get you a chance to share some of the other things you've created, and where people can get those and where they can find them.
Yes, the very first book that I wrote was on the Lord's Prayer, and my approach on that book, again, I try to contextualize that as well, especially an Iranian who comes to Christian faith. They have dealt with a lot of hypocrisy in a Muslim world when it came to prayer. A Muslim prayers. A lot of people, they show they're religious to be able to go through life and make sure they're supported by the government, and financially are secured, or so in society they are received. And that was my approach in writing that book, to try to teach Iranians how transparent Jesus was when he was praying to God and taught that Lord of Prayer, his prayer to his disciples. That was the original book, and I was well received. The third book I'm working on is a commentary on the book of Philippians, and that, I think, it is the experience I've gained in these past two books to contextualize Bible has taken me to the next level, and I try to engage a lot more with the Muslim thinkers and Iranian poets, especially Christian poets. Iranians love poems, and that is what we're lacking in our literature. Again, we're in a Western world, we don't deal with this kind of stuff. If we want a textbook, we want to read textbook. If it is a Christian theology, all we want to read is quotes and biblical verses. These are good, but an Iranian loves poems. So even though they're reading textbook, they want to get into that aspect of the literature as well. So I try to bring that flavor into the third book as well.
Oh wow! So the book on Philippians, why did you choose that book to go after next?
The answer is simple, because I was teaching that to a group of people at the same time, and it is short. It's four chapters.
Right.
But But again, it's a practical book, because aspect of that book is dealing with the persecution, and Iranians in the country are really, that is a challenge that are facing every day, and Apostle Paul is encouraging them to look at the persecution from a different perspective.
Yeah, amen. So let's talk about some of the video resources you've made. I mean, I know for one, you did a fantastic documentary introducing holy sites in Israel to the Iranian audience. You've made a lot of teaching programs that have been broadcast on Mohabbat TV and live shows as well. Talk a little bit about some of those, and what are some of your favorite moments from television and media production?
Yeah, maybe the highlight of my ministry was that documentary that I did in Israel. And again, maybe I'm a broken record again, but the reality is, coming from Iranian background, Israel and Jews, you don't talk about these two. Even Christians, Iranian Christians, when they come to faith, still struggle with this teaching that has been indoctrinated for many years, that you got to be against Jews, you got to be against Israel. I wanted to break that. I wanted to go, as an Iranian Christian, go to Israel and discover the land for myself firsthand, and take the viewers with me through this journey. So that had it was very personal for me. And also I learned a lot about biblical land, and I hope the viewers enjoyed. And I had a lot of theological teaching shows, one of which I call Blackboard. And my model was R.C. Sproul, that he used to teach in front of a blackboard. I found that very interesting, because back in the days, nowadays everything is on Zoom and a whiteboard. Back in the days when I was in school, it was a blackboard and chalk. So I wanted that to be kind of bring that to the show, and I have done hundreds of that series. Dive into a lot of heavy theological topics to help them understand the Christian faith a little bit better.
That's great. We do have a question from the audience. So how do people get these resources? Now, we know that we have Mohabbat TV, and that's broadcast in Farsi 24/7. How would you recommend for an Iranian to find some of the Iranian videos or your books in Farsi? Or how would you, how much is available in English, and can our Western audience access any of this as well?
Yeah, certainly Mohabbat TV is the main platform. We host a lot of our teachings there, and also we have YouTube and the SoundCloud platforms where Iranians can get those resources. If they don't know how to receive those resources, definitely our program response team are available to help them find the appropriate platform. For English-speaking audience, I believe the only content translated into Farsi, dubbed into English, is that the journey that I had in Israel, the documentary 6 series.
Is that on YouTube now, the English version?
It is on the Mohabbat YouTube. Those who get in touch with you guys, I believe the links are available. It can be forwarded to them to watch that in English. Maybe
if you give us permission, we can put your English documentary on Israel on the Heart4Iran YouTube as well for people to see. So that would be great. I know people might want to go find that. It was really, really well done. And it was great for me. I mean, I think you did it exactly as you said. You said, hey, I'm Iranian. I've heard so much about Israel. I want to go see what it's really like. And I thought you did a great job with that as well. So, man, it's been great talking to you, Edwin. I just want to give you a chance to share any last thoughts with the audience, and also any points where they can pray for you. People want to know, how do they pray for you? How do they pray for the ministry specifically and the movement inside of Iran?
I am really encouraged when I see my American friends, my European friends have heart to minister to Iranians. That brings a lot of joy to my heart, to see someone reaching out to a different culture that is very foreign to them in everything. Not only in the way they speak, the expressions, their food, it's a different world. And have that heart to reach out to Iranians, that is very encouraging to see that we are not alone in this ministry. And I want to encourage those who are supporting Heart4Iran, those who are supporting any Iranian ministry that are active in this field. Please continue doing that. That's not I'm not even mentioning the financial or any other support that you will contribute, but also that encouragement goes a long way, that help them to continue on, press on in their ministry. The prayer request would be wisdom and protection. We definitely need to know we have limited resources, manpower, time, and finances. We need to make sure that we are wise in using them, and also protection, because we are dealing with a part of the world that is not easy. We're not talking to Mormons. We're not talking to Jehovah's Witnesses. It's easy conversation with a lot of those folks. But when you get to the Islamic world, a lot of tension, a lot of emotion and excitement is in that conversation.
Mm.
We ask for protection, that God will keep us safe through this journey.
Amen. Amen. Well, Edwin, thank you so much for being with us. First of all, I'm just happy because I wanted our audience to get to know you. You're a valuable part of the team. You're creating so much amazing content and working with a whole team of people, creating additional content that goes into Iran all the time. And that's really fueling the movement. People in Iran are coming to Christ faster than nearly anywhere else in the world, and they need these kinds of resources. So I'm glad that our audience got to meet you and they got to hear a little bit about your book. And I hope that some of them will ask for a copy and give it to an Iranian friend, get a Farsi Bible, give it to them, and just really engage with the movement and what they could do to be a part of that. So thank you again for coming on. It's just been a real honor to have you.
Thank you. It was a great honor to be with you guys and talking about our God. God bless you all, and thank you very much for showing interest to Iran and the book as well.
Amen. Amen. Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming to be a part of the webinar today. We're really glad to have you. As always, you can get the copies of this webinar on YouTube. They're going to be archived there, also on Facebook, so that you can share this with a friend, or if you want to go back and see this again. We are talking about putting this on a podcast player so that if you don't have the ability to sit and watch this for an hour, you could also listen to it. That's going to be coming in the future. And then I want to encourage you to come to next month's webinar as well. We're going to be interviewing the author of the book, Wind in the House of Islam. His name's David Garrison, a friend of mine that has written a really, really impactful book about how God is ministering and working among Muslims all over the world, not just in Iran. And then he's got some other projects that he's working on that he wants to share, especially a prayer focus coming up for Ramadan. So you're not going to want to miss that. We really hope that you will come back to the next webinar. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please contact us. Go to our website, Heart4Iran.com. Go to find us on Facebook, watch our YouTube channel, or reach out to us, info@Heart4Iran.com, with any questions or if we can help you in any way. We want to encourage you to be a part of this amazing movement that God is bringing to pass in Iran. Iranian Muslim backgrounds are coming to Christ faster than ever before, and it's just a great privilege to be a part of that. So until we see you again, just be encouraged. Know that God is working all over the world, and we just say thank you for being a part of what we're doing in Iran. God bless you.